The 1980s is prime time for horror films, but oddly, the films of the decade aren't as shocking as the 70s or even the torture porn era of the 2000s. When it came to hunting for the most shocking and disturbed movies of the decade, it wasn't too hard, but it did prove a challenge at times to find something as shocking like The Last House on the Left or even Hostel. In the decade where horror went the most mainstream, join us for a curated list of your favorite, wildest, and most notable 1980s shockers. Make sure to let us know what you think of the list and comment which of the 1980s horror movies disturbed you the most. Number 6. Sleepaway Camp from 1983. Many know of Sleepaway Camp as a campy 1980s slasher, which it is, but there's a real twisted underbelly to this movie with almost every central plot and moment tinged with absolute darkness. We'll get into the iconic twist ending in a moment, but the shocking bits just aren't in that final reveal. We're met with pedo chefs, underage relationships, and gruesome murders from the moment we land in the titular sleepaway camp. It's like if Friday the 13th actually had some edge to it and wasn't just about the gory kills. Don't get me wrong though, there are plenty of gory moments in the first sleepaway camp, but you are sucked into the enticing story and WTF moments more than anything else. Especially when you look at the ending, which may be one of the most shocking of any movie. That final reveal, which lets you know the killer and what's been going on with him, holds up to this day and has made a lasting impression on every viewer. Number 5. Cannibal Holocaust from 1980. Probably one of the most infamous on this list, Cannibal Holocaust is obviously a deeply disturbing movie. It is a bit tired to talk about it by now, especially since the movie itself is not that great, but you can't really miss this one. Being the earliest entry on our list, Cannibal Holocaust still brings that sleazy 70s vibe and introduces it to the 1980s audiences. During this decade, we'll move away from exploitation stylings for the most part for more mainstream movies, but the decade wouldn't be complete without some type of passing of the torch shocking moment. Sadly, the film's disturbing nature comes from some reasonably gross real animal stuff, and that's just not cool. Cannibal Holocaust is just a demo reel of WTF moments rather than anything of real substance. Still, the found footage nature and utterly gross kills make this an easy contender for one of the most shocking films of the decade. Number 4. Tetsuo the Iron Man from 1989. Being disturbed by a movie can also mean being utterly confused by it. Tetsuo the Iron Man, a Japanese film, definitely falls into the confusing category, but that doesn't take away from the must-watch status. Everything about Tetsuo is unique, from its low-budget underground style to a confused and chaotic edit that would make David Lynch cringe. And let's not forget that morbidly dark sense of humor that you can find throughout the film, which makes the shocking nature even more twisted. This late 80s entry closes out the decade with some heavy metal grinding and oh my god moments. Japanese cinema is probably the best place to go for shocking 80s movies. There's all the Pink films, and entries like the Guinea Pig series could probably easily trump anything else from the decade, but Tetsuo is a rare standout though. You want your disturbing movies to have a heart and soul to them, and even though Tetsuo's heart is pumping some oil, it still brings the shock and the awe. Number 3. Society from 1989. Director Brian Yuzna, a master of disturbing. His catalog includes The Dentist, From Beyond, Reanimator, and so many more gross out films. Society may be the most shocking of all of them. This is another 1989 entry, and that could make this year the weirdest for movies ever. Tetsuo and Society, there's so many twisted body parts in the decade now. Yuzna Society dives into class, privilege, and how wanting to fit in can lead you to finding yourself in a giant orgy of melting flesh. Yes, melting flesh I just mentioned comes from the film's most iconic twisted moment, the shunting. It's a beautiful, deranged final act for the film that could only be brought to life from the world of VFX artist Screaming Mad George. This is shocking because it takes some genuine issues and real twists and shows them in such a different and dark way. Other 1980s movies have tried to scare you, but society wanted to gross you out more than anything. But it also teaches you a lesson. This movie is utterly crazy. Number 2, Nekromantik from 1987. Where do we begin with this outrageous and disgusting film? For being one of the most obscure picks, Nekromantik might be the most entertaining. It's just as gross as some of the other entries, yet the tone does try to make it feel a bit more fresh. For Germany not being known for having many horror films, you can see this as being an example of why we need more from the country. Yeah, it's super low budget and the acting isn't perfect, but there's a real charm to the out-of-world qualities, much like John Waters' films. What makes Nekromantik so great is that this film is still banned all over the world. Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, and some parts of Canada still won't allow this film. Hell, the UK only passed the uncut version of this in 2014. There are tons of allegories that scholars have written about the movie, and there's just as many critics that have called it utter trash. The infamy worldwide and the bizarre film choices keep this at the top of extreme cinema fans' minds. It's the type of severe and disgusting movie you crave as a fan, and it's a blessing that it still packs a punch to this day. Number 1, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer from 1986. For such a disgusting and filthy film, there is no denying the horror movie perfection that is Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. So much has been said about this film, and it still feels like we haven't hit the surface. Many have tried to make a serial killer film, but it's hard to match what director John McNaughton captured here. It sometimes feels like a documentary, which is helped by the low-budget filmmaking and old-school grindhouse aesthetic. This is what so many people have strived for. The rest of this entry could even be spent talking about Michael Rooker and his fantastic performance as the titular Henry. For a debut performance, there is so much underneath this role. It's incredibly layered, and Rooker's ability to make something feel so filthy, feel so real is masterful. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer truly feels like the last of the real exploitation era and has a gritty realism that the 2000s tried so desperately to repeat. From the acting to the legacy, you won't find a more disturbed and essential film of the 1980s. If you could only watch one movie from this list, put this at the absolute top and reap in its sickness. Thank you so much for checking out our list of the most disgusting, disturbed horror movies of the 1980s. Did we miss a obvious entry? What is your favorite disturbing movie? Let us know in the comments down below. Subscribe to Flickering Myth because we make videos like this every single week, and let us know what you think by giving us a thumbs up. Alright everyone, let's talk about disgusting movies down below.